All right, I'll call the Richmond and Hinesburg Police Governance Committee to order. Do you guys normally do roll call? No, I don't either. All right, first is public comment. All right, addition or deletions to the agenda? I know of none. All right, items for presentation. I think you're up, Todd.
We want to do the minutes?
Thank you for doing that.
Do you want to approve minutes first?
Oh, sorry.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the draft minutes of the April 14th meeting.
Second.
Any more discussion?
Just ask the question.
Go ahead.
My question is, was that AI generated or did one of you guys do it?
I wrote them.
Oh,
No, I did not use AI. It's simple enough for me in these types of meetings to just write through, like Stafford said this, place said that, and yeah, I just sort of keep running with it.
Okay.
If you want to see the AI generation from a select board meeting, we could send it to you.
No.
It's helpful to build the minutes, but it's definitely not the end all be all.
So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, Todd, review the draft request for proposals for the executive search firm for recruitment and hiring of a police chief.
Sure, there's a couple different versions here. But I think I kind of pointed out in the email, the one with the Hinesburg logo on it is one that I had started on a couple months ago, based on the premise of it was originally built around Hinesburg, just going out looking for a chief for Hinesburg. Recently tried to incorporate Richmond into the mix. The other two are ones I just typed in some prompts to ChatGPT and they created. What I like about the ones created by the AI is that they're more set up of having the consultant recommend a process to the town rather than trying to define the process in the RFP that we want the consultants to provide. Just because time wise, I think that would take a lot of time for us. Some of the assumptions that are built into two of them is mainly that given the current arrangement, it's assumed that the chief would be an employee of Hinesburg that is contracted services to Richmond. So that's why it's set up that way, that it's likely, going to be someone who is going to be a chief of two departments. Those are really the main assumptions. I don't know how long the process will take, but yeah, I just kind of drafted these just for people to have something to talk about and look at. Obviously, the AI ones would need some, additional facts and input before going out, but I think they provide good.
So are we gonna say that the chief is being hired for both towns?
Yeah, the way it's kind of set up, especially the one it says, what's this say? The town of Hinesburg, in collaboration with the town of Richmond, is seeking proposals to assist in the recruitment and selection of a police chief. The selected chief will be an employee of the town of Hinesburg. This would need to be changed and will lead a shared police department that serves both Hinesburg and community. We would need to change that to, the time in the immediate serving two different departments.
Okay,
Because I don't see that changing anytime soon.
but the chief will be an employee of one or the other towns, or?
Yeah, I think it has to be. Yeah, I think the way it had worked before, I think was fine. I do think, as I stated at the previous meeting, it would be easier for a chief to serve one department that serves two towns rather than a chief that serves two departments that serve two different, or that serve two towns.
Okay,
But that's,
I would tend to agree with you, at least in as far as current structures are in place. You have the contract with the town of Hinesburg for chief services to the town of Richmond.
Mhm.
That it's one employee of the town of Hinesburg that's following that contract. If that structure were to change, I think that would, in our conversations, change that structure. Then I think that would change how we put forward a position.
okay.
And that's just based on the current structure, and if we change that, that might change how we put out for a chief. Is that going down the same path that you're thinking?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the idea would be, there needs to be a chief. We have to have a process soon. I don't see the towns changing, everyone merging into one department or another before the selection process is out.
That's what I'm saying. I think we, putting this out is putting it out as the current structure is
Yes.
today.
Yeah.
Which would mean that the contracts from Hinesburg into Richmond would be your guiding party or guiding force for recruiting a new chief.
But during the hiring process, you gotta make it clear that things could change.
Well, yeah, I think that's some of what's the stuff that need to be worked into these frameworks is this is the current understanding. This is what we'd be looking for the chief to work on. It could change. I mean, it could impact the recruitment, some of that unknown. I wouldn't, what else? Yeah, so that stuff just needs to be incorporated. I think where it's gonna get a little trickier is figuring out how to incorporate Richmond, but recognize that it would ultimately be a Hinesburg decision. I mean, I don't think Hinesburg would just go astray, but it's ultimately their decision. So and then how do we kind of reflect that in the process?
Logistically, I could see a lot of support for the chief being hired as a Hinesburg employee. It's cleaner, it's simpler. And I would imagine that anybody coming in would be explained, this is the current situation. There are a lot of possible ways this could end up. It could be a combined department. It could be. But in the meantime, we need police services. I understand that Hinesburg had the chief and we were contracting for services, and it feels like we're sort of picking up where we left off. Administratively, and this is a question for Josh and Todd, what would that look like for one town doing the hiring and both towns receiving services? I think we need to sort of iron out the details and what that would look like.
Hey guys, this is Bard. I'm sorry to join late. But I guess if we're going down this path of Hinesburg does its own thing and hires a chief, and then we choose to contract or not with Hinesburg, that is certainly one scenario. It's not what I have sort of heard from citizens as they anticipate this. I think there was more a sense of shared sort of values and principles, and maybe it's more about that than who does the actual hiring and that process. But I think the question of what do we want in a chief and how do we make sure we get it, I think seems to be an interest in that from the folks I talked to in Richmond.
Yeah, and we're talking about that. Maybe you caught the tail end, but yeah, I was trying to figure out how do we create a process, and I think we'd have to rely on the experts a bit of that incorporates Richmond into that selection, but still recognizes that it would ultimately be a, town of Hinesburg decision.
Connie, is your hand up?
Go ahead, I can't see your name.
Connie,
Connie?
Thank you. My name's Connie Van Egan and I'm a resident of Richmond. And I've been associated with past work of the Richmond Police Department, particularly around the idea of a community value around the relationship of community policing with the Richmond Police Department and all the work of being a community. So, for example, what that's meant is that we had previously asked our select board and been approved, we being members of the community who formed the Richmond Racial Equity Group, which is one group I'm part of, had asked the select board to, in a sense, sponsor and support a quarterly public safety forum, which has been taking place over the past couple of years and has included the participation of whatever police leadership has been present and has been from the community members who go and has been increasingly large in terms of attendance, has been considered a really helpful and continues to be supportive activity for the community. So that's a priority. It's not a requirement, but the idea of having a priority of community connection between a town's police department and the members of the town is something that I think Richmond and certainly the folks that I've been working with to create this forum value highly. And I would really want to see that priority established not only in whatever the ultimate relationship is, but the whole process of identifying who that leadership will be and how they will themselves present themselves in terms of those values, and then how the structure of their reporting responsibilities will support that priority. So I know this may be early days in terms of putting together an whether it's an RFP for a search position or a job description or a promotional activity or a community engagement activity to think about police hiring. I would really want to see and hear that, and listening for that. And so far, as I said, early days, not hearing it. And that's why I'm speaking up, is just to say, I think that's extremely important. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
I will say there are elements of that in two of the RFPs. So. For example, one of them kind of spells it out as meet with town officials, community representatives and police department personnel to understand local needs and expectations. Again, the other one mentions, community focused policing, values of transparency, accountability, equity. So those are all things we can certainly include in here and mean to include in here. And also hope that we would get recommendations on how to achieve that from the consultants.
So I think we're all under the agreement that we plan on sharing chief services. Either way you want to call it. A contract. I think both towns should be involved in hiring the chief.
Yeah, and no one's saying we're not, but I think we need to have set out from the beginning the expectation that it will ultimately be a Hinesburg decision. If it's going to be a Hinesburg employee.
But do we have to? We don't want to hire someone that maybe Richmond doesn't think they would want as a chief.
Well, exactly.
I mean, I know it's either gonna be a Richmond employee or a Hinesburg employee. But they're gonna be working for both towns. Either way, I think we all need to agree on who the chief is gonna be. even though it's working, that, I don't see a problem with that.
No, I think that's, the understanding is that I think both towns are gonna need input. Both towns will have a seat at the table to help make that decision.
Mhm.
I think what Todd's pointing out is that at the end of the day, someone is going to be paying the employee. And that what town is making that paycheck to the employee is the ultimate hiring authority.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's Richmond, it doesn't matter if it's Hinesburg. But the way it's set up currently, it has to fall under that because we don't have a shared municipal agreement, a union municipal agreement.
No, okay, I understand that, but
I think
I think
that's
both towns need to agree on
on the hire.
yes.
Yes.
Patty's better hand up those cards.
I totally agree with you, Dennis, that this group looks like a good group. We've got a balanced group here. I mean, I think that would make both towns feel like they were part of the decision making, and this group would have to come to a consensus on who that person would be. It makes sense to me, not just like Hinesburg is cutting the check. Hinesburg's cutting the check, but we're going to split the check. So I think it really does need to be both towns.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just reiterating what you just said.
Thanks. Hard?
You know, I was thinking along the same lines, and I'm not clear why we seem to be stumbling on this issue now. So it seems clear to me Hinesburg has to make the ultimate choice. And for instance, it seems outlandish, but if it were a scenario where this group, the process results in a recommendation that Hinesburg is not comfortable with, it seems like the process should be designed to catch that early on, as opposed to the equivalent of a veto stage at the end. So I'm sort of quizzical, and I realize I joined a couple of minutes late. I'm just not really clear, why are we stumbling on this issue right now? Because it seems both obvious that Hinesburg has to decide to hire the person. If that's our scenario, it's a Hinesburg employee that we contract for. But it seems like in a collaboration, we're going to move forward with this collaboration, and getting stuck on the last thing first. I'm not sure why that's occurring now. Maybe I'm just missing something.
I don't think we're stuck.
No? We're just working through it.
Bob has his hand up.
Bob?
Hi, Dennis. I'm Bob Stafford. I'm a Richmond resident, and maybe I can help you with process.
Please.
Well, thanks, Dave. Let me tell you who I am, and I think it's important to understand where I come from. I basically spent my childhood in Richmond. I joined the Vermont State Police. I've been a police chief in Vermont, New Hampshire. And prior to retiring full-time law enforcement, for 10 years, I was the assistant director and commandant of the New Hampshire Police Academy. During my time in law enforcement, I was also a part of this consortium of law enforcement executives who worked throughout New England and Eastern New York State in doing management studies of police departments and hiring police chiefs, lieutenants, and all sorts of people. So I think you folks are headed. I'm trying to help you get to where you want to go if you want to get there. So I think, and I agree with Bart, I think you're hung up on something that you don't need to be hung up on, because I perceive that you're looking to have a joint committee from Richmond and Hinesburg to serve on the hiring committee. Because if you get somebody in here, and I'm going to recommend somebody, but if you get somebody in here, a professional that has done this, I can do it. But I think the town manager from Hinesburg said in one of the meetings that you really need an unbiased person, somebody that's not connected to either town to run this process. And I agree with that. If I did it, and I've been doing it throughout my law enforcement career, somebody would say, well, Bob's tied to Richmond. And of course, he's biased. So that's why you need an outside source. But you're going to have a committee. I would recommend that you have a committee from both communities that are going to make a decision on who the top candidates are. And if Hinesburg is the hiring authority, then that committee is going to make a recommendation to the town manager of maybe 3, 2, or maybe 1 candidate that should go forward as the police chief selection. I mean, that's what I would recommend. And I don't think, unless there is a rule that Hinesburg has or a rule that Richmond has, that you have to do an RFP. You can do a sole source. There's one person that I would hire to do this, and that's Jim Baker, the former colonel of the Vermont State Police. I've known him, I've talked with him about this process. And if I were gonna be doing this work, and I know he would do it the same way, and I'm not speaking for him, all right? I'm not representing him at all. Is that he would come in and he'd listen to you people as to what you want. And then he would formulate the process based on what you want. And the other good thing about having somebody local, I mean statewide, like Jim Baker, is he just finished doing a study in Williston. He's just finishing up doing the hiring process for the police chief in Stowe. I believe he's going to be doing the hiring process in South Burlington. He's going to be working on another project, I think, in the Burlington, Vermont area as well. He knows the area. He knows the candidates that are out there. And I can tell you, just from my experience, that the pool is limited. The police chief who would want to come into a situation like this. But what you have going for you, and I'm a firm believer in unified police departments, fire departments, anything like that. Because I've been involved in unified dispatch. It's very hard to get communities to let go of their control over the police department. But what you have going for you is you have a combined population of about 9,000 people. All right, you have a square mileage combination of maybe 75 square miles, which is a large area. But it's not undoable to have 2 officers working on a shift to cover that particular area. And having a collaborative effort, that means you have more opportunities for police officers to do things. It could be a school resource officer. There's all sorts of things that they can do other than be on patrol. That's what you got going for you. And that's what's going to hopefully entice somebody to say, I'd like to be the police chief there, especially with what you're trying to build. I've read your agreement, both for the I think it's the municipal agreement, and then the one for the chief's contract. There's some things I would change in it, but I think they're excellent. Because if you go to the, I don't know, I'm gonna get the right terminology, but the unified municipal agreement, I mean, that's a long process that both communities have to go through. They tried to do that in central Vermont, as you may be aware, and they were unsuccessful in doing that. So I think what you've been doing is right, but it's the culture that you want to build in your police department, all right? And the thing that I know that the Richmond residents really liked was the professionalism that the Hinesburg officers brought to Richmond. That's what I heard about. That's the culture you want. You want community policing because it's a philosophy. It's not some little thing that you get in a can and you open it up and it pops out. It's a philosophy from the top down, the bottom up in community. So that's my words of wisdom. Hire Jim Baker, get him in here, talk with him about what you want to do and see what he can do for you. It's going to cost you probably $20,000 plus, maybe, but why not do it the right way?
All right, thank you. Anybody else have anything?
Like Bob said, we need to find the candidate that both towns want. I agree with Bob. I don't like spending money, but it does make sense to spend money initially. Will save us a lot in the long run. What do the officers think of what's been discussed so far?
We're looking right now as to not hire a chief, but hire somebody to hire a chief,
Right.
so. You know, why, I assume Baker, is that what you said?
Jim Baker.
Yeah,
Good,
I've spoken to Jim. in
Yes,
the
I
past.
mean. Might be one of the candidates here,
Yeah, I guess that's really well. If I were to reach out to Jim to see if he was available, then the question would be for the boards if they would be willing to potentially sole source that would be the boards would need to approve that, at least in Heinsberg.
Mhm.
And I have talked to Jim before, kind of early on. And he did let me know that he does do these searches.
Would it make sense to reach out to him, A, to see if he's available?
Yeah.
And B, to see if he'd be willing to come and speak to a group?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I mean, I still
It's less
think we
work
could,
for me.
So Todd, I take it you have his phone number, because I have it right here.
Yeah, no, I've called him a few times.
Yes, I know you have, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
well, do you
Um,
think it still makes sense though to send this out and have other people?
there are firms who do this work, you know. I'm
But not
aware.
locally, probably?
There's one out of New Hampshire. They do a lot of police,
Talking about MRI?
you know, it's really, I think part of it is a matter of, you know, expediency. You know, do we want to try to do this quick? Is Jim available? You know, quickly to get things going? I imagine he's gonna have, and I could be wrong, he's gonna have less overhead than a group like MRI, which is a pretty big firm.
But will we be competing with the other towns that he's working for right now?
Possibly, like I said, I don't, you know, I don't know.
I don't either.
I mean, I think the simple thing would be to call him.
So Dennis, what he has is he has knowledge of who's available and who might be the right fit. And he might be able to steer people towards a particular process. So I've done the hiring process for the Richmond police chief twice in my career, once in the early 90s. And we were able to get somebody from the Connecticut State Police that came up, retired commander that came up. And I recently did it in 2019 when Alan Buck left. And what I was able to do, which I think Jim will be able to do, is I reached out to people that I thought might be interested, who I thought might be interested in coming here. And we actually had a really good group of law enforcement leaders, and we were able to find the right person for this particular town for the right time to get the town of Richmond through this interim basis so that they could get a hired police chief. And Paco, I think, was here for almost a year as the interim. So that's what someone can Baker bring, is he has knowledge of those people who might be available. And that would fit for this particular. But when you put out an ad, and he'll help you with the ad, you're gonna have to wanna talk about 9,000 population, so many square miles, number of offices, things like that. It's not necessarily just the salary. You wanna talk about the facility. You have a nice facility in Hinesburg. You really do. And you have a safe facility. So those are the things that will entice somebody to wanna come here. And then the stability of it.
Okay. Go ahead.
And then there's just back to who do we want? You know, we might not want a Chief Buck, for instance, at this point in Richmond's and Hinesburg's evolution, you know what I mean? Like, it would be good if, again, you guys even have a conversation about what kind of values do you want the leader of the police department to have? You know, I think things have changed, honestly, since the murder of George Floyd. You know, people stopped trusting, you know, if they did before. There's a big trust breach there. And the Hinesburg police have definitely helped heal some of that, I think, in our community. But I do really think that there needs to be a conversation about what do we value here in our both of our communities. And I think Hinesburg and Richmond are very similar.
Mhm.
I'm hoping that we have that conversation. I don't know if Jim would have that conversation with the, you know, with the community, or how does that go down?
Well, I would assume that he would. MRI would. I've worked with MRI when I was in New Hampshire. I know them very well. I know Jim Baker he would want to know what the community wants. He would want to be able to guide you.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not speaking for him. It's just, that's what we do when we're doing police chief hiring processes, is what does the community want? What are the values? What are you looking for?
And I think I would, it might be an assumption, but whoever we look at to take that step of making up this process also is going to include community feedback as part of that process.
Yeah, if we were to put out an RFP and these RFPs have it in there to start, is, how are you gonna engage the communities? What's the process gonna be? How are you gonna get feedback on values? Yeah, I mean, that's the whole, otherwise, you might as well just have one person, making a decision. So it sounds like at this point, we're kind of, it'd be helpful to know from each of the boards, if there were someone, available, say locally, within the state, that would be willing to do this project. Is each board comfortable going ahead with that person or firm? Well, let's say if it's any one firm, without a competitive process. I don't want to get too far down that at all. Any select board input.
I think if an entity or a firm came and met with us and let us interview them and review the qualifications, credentials, philosophies, and we were happy, I would be comfortable proceeding using them. But I'm not just going to throw a dartboard and say we're going to take that firm.
So you're okay with calling Jim and having him come in for,
Well, I think before the cart gets in front of the horse, let me contact Jim and see if he's even available.
okay,
I mean,
This is Bart. I think that makes sense. The other thing I think we should avoid is contacting him and at the same time put forth a competitive RFP. I think that's a fork in the road.
Yeah. Yeah, if we call Jim and he's not available, okay. But if we call Jim and he is available, I think it would be worthwhile to contact him and explore him first, because he does have a recommendation from somebody here in Richmond and he knows the area. So I think it's worth a conversation.
yeah, because I mean, when I started this process and thinking it was going to be a chief for Hinesburg, I had talked to Jim, but I felt it was important for Hinesburg to go through an RFP process to find the consulting firm that was going to help the town find a chief. So if both boards, have a different feeling, assuming he's available, that's fine, but that's the rationale behind how this started out as an RFP process.
all right, I guess we'll.
When's your
call-
board meet next?
Next Monday, I'll put it on the agenda to get an idea from the board about what they think of the
Okay,
process.
and I can contact Jim.
Yeah, and you guys are next Wednesday,
Mhm.
so we could contact both boards and Jim by our next meeting, which is in 2 weeks.
Does anybody have anything else? So items for next agenda, I think we just. You need to wait and see what
We'll be
the
fine.
two boards come up with, what
Yeah.
you come up with.
Yep.
But I think we can all, if you have ideas, something you would want different for the interview process, there's no reason we could start writing those things down too.
Right, I mean, if there are, we can still kind of focus on. If we end up with going on RFP, what are we gonna want in there? I think. A pretty good part of it is community input. That's fine.
Okay. I don't have anything else.
Should we have either feedback from Jim or a model RFP for next meeting to review as part of our next agenda? Or is that too fast?
I think I need to hear, I think we need to hear what Jim, after talking before
Yeah.
deciding what the agenda is.
So it's too fast, got it.
Yeah, because I mean, I think if I hear he's not available, then what would need to do is I think start taking a lot of the detail in the RFP that I have about the department size and all that kind of stuff and plugging it into the RFP that talks about the one that says Town of Hinesburg in partnership with the Town of Richmond, and it's plugging things into that. But I'm not going to spend time doing that until I hear back from Jim.
So next meeting will either be a discussion with Jim or a discussion about an RFP,
Yeah, right.
kind
pretty
of
much.
two roads.
So,
Right?
All right. There's nothing else. Oh, we got. Well, that's just a thumbs up.
And I think before we meet with Jim, if we could each do our individual homework and come up with questions and be ready to share philosophies and what we are looking for. So we're prepared if Jim comes in to speak with us, that we can fairly ask of him what we're looking for and what he could deliver to meet those expectations. That would be good.
Mhm. All right. I move to adjourn.
You can't, you're the chair, but I'll move to adjourn.
Oh, I do
Second,
for the DRB.
Oh.
I'll second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Bye.
Aye.
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 Well, thank you.